Hey there and welcome to the channel. Today I thought I would share a detailed timeline of the history of Roshar, also known as the world of Brandon Sanderson's fantasy epic, The Stormlight Archive. There are some things which are rather Cosmere focused early on, just because this is a pre-shattering world, and so by nature some mention of the shattering and its effects will be necessary. However, this video is intended for everyone from first-time readers to deep lore arcanists. A quick note about the dates in this video: I've chosen to use the last Desolation as the main anchor point for them, even though that is not what is normally used when people are discussing the Cosmere. Also, the dates in the early sections of the video will be rather fuzzy. However, as we get closer and closer to the events of the books, the dates will grow more firm. The creation, about 8,500 to 7,500 years before the last Desolation. The first event in the history of the planet, we know that it occurred before the shattering of Adonalsium. In fact, we know that Adonalsium specifically grew the continent of Roshar. A quick word about the Rosharan solar system at large, which contains a whopping 3 planets inside the habitable zone, with an additional 10 gas giants beyond that area. Roshar is the middle of the 3 habitable planets. The one closest to the sun is known as Ashyn, and the one furthest from the sun is known as Braze. We do not know for certain, however I think it is very likely that most of the native flora and fauna of Roshar came from this creation event. This would include the Pershendi, the great shells, the cremlings, the rock-like plants and trees, and anything which holds a gem heart. So basically everything except for horses, chickens, and spoilers. We do know that the high storms predate the shattering, as well as a large portion of the non-sentient spren, the majority of which were created from the leftover investiture of the creation of the planet. High storms are massive and inexpressively destructive typhoons which sweep the continent of Roshar east to west at irregular intervals. As they sweep across the land, they strip it bare, leaving nothing but rock behind in its wake. They also infuse all gems left out in the storm, like rubies and emeralds and sapphires, with Stormlight, which is a kind of illumination and power found on Roshar. Though these stars do come at irregular intervals, it is possible to predict their coming through the use of complex mathematical equations. Spren are basically the equivalent of the Fae for the world of Roshar. They exist mostly in another realm and are, for the most part, mindless manifestations of concepts, thoughts, and emotions, often appearing as dancing flames around a fire, as a glowing golden aura around a person who is experiencing pride, or any number of other things. The Shattering, about 6,000 years before the last Desolation. There isn't much that I want to say about the shattering of Adonalsium here, as it has little to do directly with the history of Roshar. However, it is the single most important event in the entire history of the Cosmere and bears some mention here. So to keep it brief, at least 16 individuals as well as Hoid somehow managed to shatter the cosmic entity known as Adonalsium into 16 pieces known as shards. This was most likely accomplished through the use of the Dawn Shards. The Dawn Shards may or may not have been created by Adonalsium, and may or may not have been the tools which Adonalsium used to create the universe itself. Much is unknown about the nature of the Dawn Shards, known as the 4 Primal Commands. However, they bear mentioning here, as at least one ends up being transported to and stored upon the planet of Roshar. Among those present at the shattering were Hoid, as already mentioned, a dragon named Corabellium Avast, who took up the Shard of Cultivation, a man named Tanabast, who took up the Shard of Honor, and a man named Raiz, who took up the Shard of Odium. One or more members of the Sleepless were probably also present at this event, given their species' innate knowledge of it. However, to my knowledge, there is no specific confirmation of that. Lastly, the shattering occurred on the planet Yolen, though its effects were felt throughout the Cosmere, with it having a lasting impact upon the pre-existing magics of the Cosmere in some unknown ways. Immigration, less than 6,000 years before the last Desolation. Sometime not long after the shattering, 2 of the shards, those of Honor and Cultivation, travel to and take up residence upon Roshar. They either began or were already in a romantic relationship together. Originally, I had a joke in here about how Tanavest was probably also a dragon because at the time it was unknown and it would be kind of weird, an interspecies romance. But then somebody asked Brandon if Tanavest was a dragon at the Dragonsteel 2023 spoiler Q&A, and he actually confirmed that Tanavest is human, so I guess their relationship just is weird. These two shards, as well as the rest of the shards, would be considered gods when considering their raw power as well as their capabilities. Existing in 3 dimensions at once, we know for a fact that 2 shards together have enough raw power to create entire planets wholesale from nothing. We also know that they are capable of creating sapient life by imbuing a portion of their essence into the souls of living beings. However, it should be noted that every shard is, by its very nature, only a portion, a 16th to be exact, of the power of Adonalsium. Nevertheless, any shard is likely to become worshipped as god by the inhabitants of any planet which it visits. That is what happened in this case on Roshar, where honor and cultivation would come to be worshipped as gods by the Proshendi. This is most likely when the true Spren, also known as sapient Spren, came into existence, as they were given further investiture by the 2 new shards. This is as good of a place as any to specifically mention 2 of the non-native species on Roshar, which immigrated to the planet at some unknown point in time. The Sleepless, also known as the Daisian Aeneans, are the species we know for sure does not originate on Roshar. They are actually a hive-mind species consisting of hundreds to thousands of insect-like creatures. As a result of this nature, they are essentially immortal. They protect the Dawn Shard, which resides on the island of Aenea, and are likely the ones responsible for transporting it there. There are only 24 members of this species alive at the time of the books, and all of them descend from one single progenitor. 4 members of this species do not follow or obey the progenitor, though the rest of them do. The Sleepless are capable of communicating between each other at a continental scale, as well as controlled and intentional evolution. As a result of this, many of the Sleepless have managed to mimic the form of humans, though often doing so poorly, and disguising this with either scarring or tattoos, and covering most of their body in clothing. Importantly, the text on the back cover of each of the books is actually written by the Sleepless in communication with each other. The second species are known as the Shia Aeneans, and even less is known of them than is known of the Sleepless. They're extremely pale, often described as a crystalline blue color, and are capable of shaping and reshaping their body at will, capable of even curing hangovers with a simple thought. Though we have only ever seen 1 member of this species that I can remember, and he has always chosen to appear so far in a humanoid form. They cast a shadow in the wrong direction, a manifestation of their innate connection to the cognitive realm, also known locally as Shades Mar. Also, the Shia are functionally immortal, with members laughing off physical harm as if it had no meaning to them. As implied by the names, both of these 2 species once made their homeland upon the island of Aenea off the western coast of Roshar. So right now we have the storm-swept planet of Roshar, a barren rocky continent with mostly aquatic life and 3 sentient species, as well as a variety of Spren living in the cognitive realm. The Exodus, about 3,100 years before the last desolation. On Ashyn, the first planet in the solar system, a population of humans gained access to unbound surgebinding. There is a lot of uncertainty as to what exactly that means. All magical abilities, as well as all of physics, are referred to as surges by the native population of Roshar. Surgebinding is the act or ability to use magic, and in the modern era, all surgebinders are bound by oaths. What is unclear is whether or not the surgebinding used on Ashyn had any relation to the surgebinding that we see today on Roshar. We do know that the Proshendi had access to a primitive, though definitely related, form of surgebinding at this time. We also know that at least 1 human on Ashyn was known as a bondsmith, a modern category of surgebinder. Whatever the specifics, we know that the use of this unbound surge binding led to the absolute desolation of the entire planet. Whatever the case may be, through some unknown method, the bondsmith was able to transport a surviving group of refugee humans to the planet of Roshar. It is from this group of refugees that all modern humans are descended on Roshar, from every ethnicity, culture, and nation, with the sole exception of the Eerie people, who originate from some other unknown migration. Honor and possibly, cultivation entreated the Pershendi to allow the humans a place to live and to regrow upon the planet. The Pershendi people accepted and offered the area of Shinover to the humans. As high storms always blow east to west, Shinover was the only region on the entire continent which was protected from them and which could support the ecology and way of life which the humans were used to. As a result, to this day, Shinover is the only region of the planet that would look remotely familiar were we to visit it today, with grasses and trees and soil, as well as the only hospitable place for birds to live. As such, all birds on Roshar are referred to by Rosharans as chickens. From parrots and doves to chickens. Next to nothing is known of what occurred on Ashyn before the Exodus, and even less is known about what remains on the planet today. Out of universe, we know that the future project, the Silence Divine, will be set on Ashyn and will involve some sort of diseases which grant magical abilities. We do know that there was an initial period of peace between the humans and the Pershendi. However, and unfortunately, this peace did not last for long. At this time, Odium, also known as the Shard of Divine Hatred, arrives on Roshar as well. It appears that he was in some way involved in the destruction of Ashyn, as many first-hand witnesses to the Exodus and the events of the First Desolation refer to him as the original god of the humans. The events of the Exodus would be memorialized in the mythology of humanity as the expulsion, when humanity was expelled from the Tranquiline Halls, also known as Heaven, by the voidbringers, a term which would eventually come to refer to the Pershendi for a time. Flame and char, skin so terrible, eyes like pits of blackness, music when they kill. Voidbringers, however, was originally a Pershendi term for the humans who brought Odium with them. I should make some further explanation of who and what the Pershendi are. I left their nature vague before to disguise the fact that humans were non-native to Roshar. However, they are perhaps the most interesting and intriguing fantasy species in the modern genre, and as such deserve a thorough explanation of their nature. Properly named singers. Like all native creatures of Roshar, they have a gem heart, a crystalline growth within their body. This gem heart is capable of bonding or trapping spren. This bonding or trapping occurs during a high storm, with a singer wandering out alone to face the Stormfather face to face. Within this storm, by either mentally attaining the right mindset to attract a spren or by trapping it beforehand in a gem, Pershendi is then able to draw it into their gem heart and bond it. For example, by bonding up Spren, a Pershendi will enter war form. In war form, they will begin to grow armor-like carapace all over their body, as well as being granted increased stamina and strength. The singers have a natural ability to hear the harmonic rhythms of the planet itself. As the singer speaks, they do so attuned to the tones of the planet, alternating rhythm and pitch to fit their mood. For example, a singer may speak to the rhythm of reprimand when correcting a child, or to the rhythm of appreciation when thanking someone for a favor. A singer will naturally attune to the rhythm which best matches their mood when not paying attention, often subconsciously humming along to it. However, they can also attune to any chosen rhythm with some mental effort, and that chosen rhythm will then affect their mood. The rhythm of peace is actually what the Pershendi use for their timekeeping. All rhythms are naturally unchanging. The movements and the rhythm of peace are what make up the equivalent of the Pershendi's hours and minutes. By setting oral histories to these rhythms, specifically the rhythm of memory, the singers were able to maintain an incredibly accurate and long-lasting history stretching for thousands of years. These rhythms are actually a Cosmere-wide phenomenon, and every planet and shard has their own rhythm. The singers are the most adept at hearing these rhythms of any species that we know of, and as such it has become an integral part of their culture. Also, the singers are very visually different as well. Their skin has a marbled coloration of red, black, and white, with variations and differing patterns being passed along. Some singers are only red and black, while others are red and white, and a small minority of the population are colored all three. Their skin tones will begin to whiten or fade over time with age. They also normally have either red or orange hair, an extremely uncommon hair color among Roshar humans. The singers also had access to some sort of primitive surgebinding before the arrival of humans, though this most likely occurred through the bonding or trapping of spren in their gem heart in some sort of symbiotic relationship. War, about 3,080 years before the last desolation. About 20 years passed with the human population settling in and beginning to rebuild their society. Before too long, however, tensions began to emerge between the singers and the humans. Odium was probably involved in this in some way, and the singers assert that the humans began it, being dissatisfied with their remote corner of the world. Whatever the specifics were, it was not long before a war began between the two groups, a war which would later be known as the First Desolation. At some point during or before this war, Odium began to side with the singers, granting some of them the ability to return to life over and over again through a means similar to that of bonding spren, with living Parshendi serving as hosts. These singers who would return from the dead would come to be called the Fused and were the leaders of their people. As a response to Odium siding with the singers, Honor then began to side with the humans. Ishar, a man of great importance among the humans, and possibly the bondsmith who opened the portal from Ashyn, became the leader of a group of 10 heralds. These 10 heralds were gifted 10 blades by Honor, mystical swords which were capable of cutting through anything seamlessly, except for living flesh, which it could not cut at all. Instead, it phases through the living flesh and cuts the soul within. Additionally, each of these blades gave their wielders access to 2 differing kinds of surgebinding. Each of these combinations would be considered its own unique flavor of surgebinding. Ishar received the blade of bondsmithing. Jezrien, the leader and king of all men at the time, would receive the blade of windrunning, and so on. These blades were thereafter known as the Honor Blades. There is some mythical reference in the modern day to some sort of choosing day for the heralds, though whether this referred to the process by which they chose their blades or the process by which the 10 heralds were chosen is a little unclear. Tom, the Stoneward, was in some way an outsider to the group, one who should never have been one of them. This, in my opinion, suggests some sort of upset to the process of the choosing day. The 10 heralds were then gifted immortality by Honor, and after some final climactic battle between the humans and the Parshendi, were to travel to the planet Braze, where they would, by binding agreement with Honor and Odium, hold the Fused from returning again. This agreement would then end the war between the human and the Parshendi. With that, the First Desolation came to an end. However, there was one thing that the Heralds and Honor failed to anticipate. On Braze, the Fused, stuck there as only incorporeal souls, would relentlessly hunt the Heralds. Chasing them until they were captured, they would then be subjected to unending torture. As immortals, the heralds could not be killed, at least not permanently. However, this also meant that there was no end to the suffering which could be inflicted upon them. If ever one herald were to break under this torture, then all the Fused would be free to return to Roshar, where the war would begin again. Alongside them, all 10 heralds would return to lead the forces of mankind. Thus, the cycle of desolations begins. With every desolation, the destruction would increase and humanity would come closer and closer to the brink of utter annihilation. But more on that next time. This script ended up going a lot longer than I had anticipated, so I decided to split it up into 2 parts. I know there have been several timelines of the Cosmere videos out there, but I've never seen anyone doing a timeline of just Roshar and kind of focusing on that, and I know it was something I wanted to see, so if you liked this video, please make sure to comment and like and subscribe, and we will see you all next time.